I am a psychology professor at a few different universities in Southern California. I specialize in human sexuality, gender and sexual orientation, and health psychology. I also have a sex and wellness podcast called What's Your Position? And I do also work in the clinical research field.
And what led you down this path of focusing on sex and sexuality?
I grew up in a really religious, conservative household that prided itself on purity culture and sexual shame. There was a lot of negativity surrounding the human body, and a lot of emphasis placed on the purity of a woman and waiting until marriage. There wasn't a lot of education options available to me. I wasn't allowed to take health class in my high school, so I really didn't get a lot of sex education growing up. And when I got to college in California, I took a health class and realized how much I had missed out on. And I was taught that if you kissed a boy, you'd get pregnant, or if you touched someone with HIV, that you would contract HIV. And when all of these lies were undone for me, in the various health and human sexuality classes I took at universities, I began to realize that there was a lot more people like me who had been fed these lies their whole life, and I made it my mission to undo that for them. So I started a nonprofit called Shape when I was about 26 years old, and I started going to local junior highs, high schools, youth shelters, anyone that would take me, really, colleges, and teaching people about STIs and HIV and how it's actually transmitted, trying to have a conversation that is both educational and entertaining, and honest, and trying to help individuals who might not be getting that information at home or at school so that they can make healthy choices in their lives.
What are some of the biggest repercussions that we face if we aren't getting this accurate
Oh,
information out there? What are some of the biggest repercussions you've seen?
so I actually have quite a few statistics, if you don't mind. I've actually
Please.
got them in my back pocket. So right now in our country, there are only about 20 states that require that any sexual education that is given is medically accurate. Um, and when you look at things like STI rates, Mississippi and Louisiana have the highest teen STI rates in the country. And both of those states actually don't have any sex education that is mandated. If it is talked about in school, both of those states require that abstinence only is stressed, and that there is no discussion about contraception, or any issues surrounding the LGBTQ community or consent. As far as teen pregnancy is concerned, Mississippi and Louisiana again lead the pack when it comes to the number of teen pregnancies that we see in this country. When it comes to sexual assault, Alaska has the highest sexual assaults in 2020, and sex education is not mandated in Alaska. They are not required to provide sex education, discuss any type of consent or sexual assault. And as far as porn consumption is concerned, most individuals see pornography of some sort for the first time at the age of 10 in this country. And Kansas has the highest porn consumption of any state in the country. And there is no mandated medically accurate contraception or consent, or sexual assault conversations happening in their sex ed. So when we look at things like STI rates, teen pregnancy rates, sexual assault, and porn consumption, and in my world, I am all for the consumption of digital porn, audio porn, erotica. I do think that there needs to be some sort of teachings about porn literacy, and how to view pornography in a healthy and safe way, and how to understand that it's not necessarily real life. We're watching a film, we're watching a movie. And that's unfortunately the main source of sex education that teenagers get, is through pornography. And we aren't giving teenagers the tools or the education to go ahead and live this part of their life. When we talk about the idea that an individual is going to be sexually active, it is very difficult, I think, for a lot of people to navigate the idea that it could be their teenager having sex. But the average age of sexual onset, so the first sexual behaviors, whether that be mutual masturbation, oral sex, or physical penetration, typically happens at around age 15, with most teenagers saying that they have had, about 90% of teenagers say that they have had sex before they leave high school. So by eliminating all of these tools that we could be providing them, we're asking them to go into a very adult space with nothing to arm themselves with.
So what you're saying is that contrary to what popular belief is, the abstinence only and minimal sex education is actually creating the very thing that many people think it is protecting against, because adolescents are apparently still having sex, even though they're encouraged not to. And they know less about how to be safe and responsible in doing so. I have also seen and heard of some of the studies that talk about the fact that comprehensive sex education led to less teen pregnancies and actually less teen sex.
Yeah. Yeah, there's actually quite a few studies that show when a teenager is introduced to the ideas of what sex is, the consequences of those behaviors. So, illness is a consequence of those behaviors. You can contract an STI. Pregnancy is a consequence. Emotions, catching feelings are a consequence of having sex. And when we actually educate people about the consequences of these behaviors, we see a delay in onset of sexual behaviors in individuals who receive comprehensive sex education more than we do in individuals who receive abstinence only education. We also see declines in states like California and Washington, where they do have comprehensive sex education. We do see decreases in STI rates and teen pregnancy rates and sexual assault rates as well. So there can absolutely be a correlation made between the type of education that one receives in high school regarding sexuality and the type of behaviors and consequences that are subsequently given to those individuals. We are actually number one in the world. It's not a great statistic, but we are the number one first world country that leads the world in teen pregnancy, STI rates, rape. We have the highest numbers of this, and we tout our education system as one of the best. And unfortunately, countries like Norway are outshining us, where they have comprehensive sex education starting in kindergarten. And they teach people about their bodies, and they teach people about bodily functions and about their periods and about reproduction. And we see just across the board lower numbers in every area that I've mentioned in countries that instill comprehensive sex education from a young age.
What are some of the biggest misconceptions that you see floating around in mainstream culture about sex that are not true, but there's something that even adults don't seem to fully understand?
I think a lot of misconceptions that are in our world right now would be, if you talk about it, it happens. Like if you talk about sex, that means your kids are going to immediately go have sex. That's like that's such a backwards way of thinking. Your kid watches you drive. They don't try to drive your car because they know that that's not a behavior that they can engage in. They know they have to wait until they're 16, and they know what might happen. And if we talk about, hey, here's what drugs and alcohol can do to your body, it doesn't lead people to go and do those drugs, because they are being educated about the consequences of those behaviors. One of the biggest misconceptions and one of the biggest fears I think that parents and educators have is if we teach teenagers about sex, they're going to go and have sex. Newsflash, they're already having sex. They're going to have sex whether you talk to them about it or not. I think another big misconception is that all porn is bad. I do not agree with that statement. I think that pornography serves as an excellent tool for a lot of people. It's a way for a lot of individuals to see themselves for the first time in an intimate way. A lot of LGBTQ individuals don't see themselves represented erotically or intimately on mainstream television and movies. And so pornography is really a way that they can sort of get in touch with what that looks like for them. There's also a big misconception that pornography will always lead to addiction, and that's not the case either. There's absolutely pornography out there that is degrading and violent and inappropriate for any age person to see. And I don't necessarily think that young people should be watching pornography. I don't necessarily think that everyone should be watching pornography every time they masturbate or have sex. I personally think it's important to incorporate some acoustic skills from time to time to use your imagination. But I do think that it does serve a purpose. It can serve purposes in relationships as well, showing people some new ways to do things, some new kinks, some new ideas that they can take to the bedroom. I think another big misconception is that women are not as sexual as men. I think that we play down women's libido, and I think that we also take away women's pleasure. In a lot of areas in this country, it's heavily steeped in religion. And procreation is what sex is for in these areas. And a woman doesn't need to orgasm in order to get pregnant. So what good is a woman's orgasm is really the thought process. Everyone deserves pleasure. Every single human being on this planet deserves to experience pleasure from sexual experiences, be it by themselves or with a partner. And I really think that it's detrimental, shameful, and mentally and physically harmful to tell an entire group of individuals that their pleasure doesn't matter.
Love the passion. I love it.
It's what I'm known for.
That's incredible. I mean, yeah, if you are an educator, it's an important attribute, like you said, educating and being kind of entertaining, it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. You're going to lose them. You're going to lose them in 5 seconds if you can't keep them engaged.
Yeah, you have 5 seconds. If you could put into one message, just one message to everyone in the world, something about human sexuality that the world is just not getting, what would that message be?
It is a basic human need. There's something called the hierarchy of needs, and it was created by a social psychologist by the name of Abraham Maslow. And on this hierarchy of needs, there are things like food, shelter, socialization, safety, family, self-actualization is at the very top. The only thing that is on this hierarchy of needs twice is sex. It's at the very bottom, and it's smack dab in the middle. It is something that we as humans and we as mammals engage in, not just for procreation, but for pleasure. It is healthy. It releases some of the best, most natural chemicals that our bodies crave and desire on a daily basis. It provides intimacy with ourselves and with others. And it is something that every single person deserves to learn about, understand, appreciate, and participate in.
So on that law of hierarchy, is it sex that we are needing, or is it the connection that comes from sex?
It's both. Sex is a basic biological need, and then it is also the sex and intimacy that we need with another person that is a basic human need that we need socialization to exist as humans. We are social creatures. There are tons of studies that show individuals who are isolated, especially they do a lot of studies on individuals in prison who are in social solitary confinement. And the way the brain restructures itself in such a negative way and the physical effects that it has, loneliness actually can lead to higher rates of heart disease, stroke, and cancer. Loneliness is an illness that can affect us both physically and mentally. We live in a very ableist society. So I was actually going to mention, I think that one of the best ways that we can incorporate sex in the community of individuals who have a disability is through camming. And this is how they can actually reach out and feel as if that isn't a part of them right then. They are a sexual person. They are not someone with a disability who wants to have sex. And we are not a society that creates safe and physically capable scenarios for people with disabilities to engage in sexual activities. We're also extremely judgmental when it comes to kinks and fetishes. I'm all about safe, sane, and consensual as long as everyone involved is enthusiastically giving consent at all times. And what you are doing is being done in a safe, sane, and consensual way. I don't find there to be a fetish or a kink that anyone really needs to shame. Unfortunately, that does happen frequently. And we're talking about very small things like impact play, being spanked, having our hair pulled, having our hands put above our head, sensory play, wearing a blindfold, covering your mouth. These things can be looked at in certain scenarios and situations as wrong or bad, and people can be shamed for such very small kinks that are on the vanilla side of the spectrum of kink. And I think that using cams and using this connection with another individual is imperative for individuals who can't leave their house physically or can't find someone who's willing to be intimate with them because of age, weight, a disability, money, socioeconomic status. We place such parameters around who we want to be with and how big their penis has to be or how thin they have to be or how big their boobs have to be. And we have all of these criteria and all of these expectations, and we've created for ourselves an impossible scenario. And so to be connected to another individual, to have intimacy, even if it's not an intimacy that will ever be in person, ever be like skin to skin intimacy, to have even a little bit of intimacy can reduce the amount of stress in our life. It can reduce the amount of heart attacks we have. It can reduce the amount of feelings of loneliness, which can lead to suicidality, depression, anxiety, mental health issues, the use of medication, which can then compound sexual disorders. Being intimate with someone, even if it's not sexual, even if it's just a friend that you're intimate with, is exponentially important to the human experience.
That's definitely what we found to be true, is that, you know, and what gets even more interesting is the Kinsey Institute has been studying a lot of LiveJasmin's user base. And what they have found is that the models who make the most money, who are on the longest calls, are talking the least about anything explicit. They've connected with this member.
Mm-hmm.
This member is calling them to share about what's going on with work, to share about what's the latest with a family member who might be sick. It's
what they're making for dinner.
What they're making for dinner. I've had a model tell me that she has a member regularly call in and set up the screen, and he says, okay, now just go about your day and I'm going to be working. And it makes him feel like he's living life with someone. And how it would be if you had a partner who's in the house and you're both kind of doing your own thing, you know, going about your day. But that even aspect of just not wanting to feel alone in the house or wherever he is.
I think that there was a lot of that during COVID. I go back to the fact that I know that internet camming, I think that the statistic that I have is that, yeah, there it was. There is a 1,200% increase in user base on camming websites between 2019 and 2021. 1,200% increase because we couldn't do anything. We couldn't go anywhere. We couldn't see anyone. I knew people who would do that exact thing with their family or their friends. They would call them on Zoom and just turn the camera on and do their homework or cook their meal. And they did this because normally that person would have come over to do that thing, but they couldn't be in the same room with them. And we sort of glommed on to this idea of camming. And for a lot of people who are introverted, it kind of stuck. And it's something that really benefits them. They don't have to go out into public. If they have agoraphobia, if they have social anxiety, if they have any sort of physical or mental disability or handicap that might cause their going out of their house to be arduous or stressful in any way, being able to utilize a camming system for any reason is brilliant. And I think that COVID really showed us that this is a way that we can connect with people and have it be meaningful.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the thing, is that when you can't touch someone and it is truly just through a computer screen or messaging, you almost have to be more vulnerable and authentic to make it meaningful. It's interesting because I've interviewed so many couples therapists and
Mm.
and sex therapists. One of the things that they say the most is that they get couples in their office that are having sex but are not willing to talk about sex with each other, which is creating all kinds of problems. But in this dynamic with camming, in order for a member, let's say, to have their needs met, they have to be very clear and communicate explicitly with what it is they're looking for, their fantasy, their kink. And I think that that really bonds people.
I do too. I think that anytime you share a fantasy or an intimate part of you, you get an adrenaline rush. And when you get that adrenaline rush, you get a release of dopamine, which is based in our reward center. And when that person reciprocates, it is something that really creates a bond with that other person. And to be open and vulnerable in that way is sometimes something that's not done in an in-person setting. I know that there are a lot of couples who get into open relationships, and those open relationships require a lot of communication, a lot of what I'm going to allow, what I'm not going to allow, what I'm comfortable with and what I'm not comfortable with, what my fantasies are, why I want to open this relationship, why I want to swing or bring on a third person. And studies, time and time again, have shown couples who open their relationship ethically and with boundaries have better communication skills than monogamous partners do. And that communication translates outside of the bedroom as well. I think what we're seeing is this willingness to discuss the hardest thing we can discuss, which is sex. It's very difficult for us as a society, especially in this puritanical society that we find ourselves in, especially in the patriarchal society that we find ourselves in. For women to express that they would like some power is a very difficult thing for a lot of people to do. And you find that when couples are capable of having difficult conversations surrounding fantasy, kink, and intimate details of what they like and what they don't like, the communication outside of the bedroom becomes exponentially better as well. And so if someone is able to communicate their intimate needs through someone on a phone or on a video chat, they probably also are able to communicate other intimate details of their lives as well with that person, because it is one of the most open and vulnerable aspects of our life.
Could not agree more. I want to talk more about this discomfort that you touched on within society to even mention sex, and especially when
Mm.
it comes to, I think, women's sexuality particularly. Do you find it's true that for some reason women's sexuality in particular is policed more? And if
Mm.
so, why do you think that is?
I think it has a lot to do with power. I think that anytime somebody has a fear of their power being taken away, they are going to automatically want to criminalize or distrust the person who is seemingly taking away their power. For a very long time, men held the power when it came to sex. Men were the courters. They court the women. They ask the women out on a date. They pay for the date. They ask the women when they want to get married. Their fathers were in charge of them until they found a suitor. We weren't allowed to have credit cards until the 70s. We weren't allowed to sit on juries until the 70s. Women haven't had a lot of power, and sex is power. Sex is such a powerful aspect of being a human being, to bring someone else to the peak of ecstasy, to bring someone else pleasure. It's a very powerful feeling. And when used correctly, that power can actually be compassionate. And that power can actually be seen as a tool to help increase the love and the connection in your relationship. When used incorrectly, that power can actually be used to take power from someone else via a sexual assault, any sort of sexual misconduct that occurs, sexual harassment. These are all forms of manipulation in power. I think the problem and why women are getting policed so much is because there is a very large push right now for women to own their sexuality. Women are also more sexually fluid than men. So women are much more capable of running the gamut between sexualities and experiencing more sexuality and more intimacy with varying genders than men are. I think that that is also something that is difficult for people to comprehend, and they want to police that as well. Why should women get to have pleasure with both men and women unless I'm benefiting from it in some way? A lot of times when bisexual women kiss a girl, it is fetishized and it is not seen as real or something that should be taken seriously, when in fact that woman is just attracted to that person, and they want to kiss that person, whether it be a man or a woman or a trans man or a trans woman or a non-binary individual. We fetishize when women do anything that is outside of the heteronormative scripts that we've created. I think men are afraid that if women become more sexual, they're going to have less orgasms somehow, or they're going to not be the focus of pleasure. What they should be realizing is that giving a woman oral sex and bringing her to orgasm is powerful, and they can still have that power, and they can actually bring joy to someone else. And when we think about it from this place of giving and this space of sharing in an intimate act with someone and watching your partner enjoy what you're doing and really receiving ecstasy and pleasure from this, that should be the power that we're focusing on, instead of saying, oh, she's a woman, oh, she's too sexy, she's wearing that dress, she must want something. We dumb down women's power because the people who are in power are afraid that it's going to be taken away.
What do you think has to happen for us to be more comfortable with discussing sexuality, and just sexuality as a whole, becoming more healthy around it?
I think that the conversation starts right here. I think that anyone who has a conversation is now bringing it to the forefront of the scope. I talk about sex with everybody. I use the appropriate terminology. I talk about orgasms. I talk about masturbation. I make sure that my students write papers about something outside of their comfort zone. And it can be as small as going into a sex shop or as big as stopping porn consumption. I had somebody this semester write about having sex for the first time since she broke up with her boyfriend. I mean, I literally having a conversation with anybody about sex. And it doesn't have to be about penetrative sex. It can be about having a heavy period. It can be about having a miscarriage. It can be about talking to your boyfriend about wanting to be more spontaneous in bed. It can be about queefing. We just need to start having conversations and having them regularly, putting them into the dialogue of our everyday normal conversations, because this is an everyday normal occurrence. We talk about school shootings as if they are commonplace, yet we can't talk about the joy that is an orgasm. Like it blows my mind what we're willing to discuss regularly on social media, what we're willing to tolerate and consume regularly on television, and yet we can't see a nipple. It blows my mind that a natural occurrence in our everyday life, a biological need, is something that we are so scared of. And it all stems from very puritanical, very religious roots that this country has. If we can start undoing those and start talking about sex as if it's a very normal thing in everyday conversation, taking classes, engaging in content that is outside your scope, listening to the Sex and Psychology podcast with Justin Lay Miller. He lays things out in a very scientific, non-raunchy, non-explicit way. Sex with Emily is another excellent podcast for people to, that I encourage people to listen to. The Principles of Pleasure is an amazing, amazing series on Netflix. That's a very scientific, research-based 3-part episode on female pleasure and how everyone can sort of start to understand it. Sex Explained is another excellent documentary on Netflix that creates a very safe educational space for people to learn about sex, the history of sex, what an orgasm is. We need to start incorporating these things into our daily lives in order to make them norm and less taboo.
I love that you gave really practical resources for people to check out as far as podcasts. We love Justin Lane Miller here.
Me too.
He's been interviewed as well, and some of the shows even on Netflix that you recommend.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite things to do for students is to give them a large swath of media to consume, not just a textbook, not just an article, but things that are really tangible and present for this society, for this day and age. So documentaries, movies, podcasts, really there's so many areas in life that you can incorporate sex. You don't have to watch pornography. You can actually listen to audio that's been recorded. That's erotic audio. Quinn, I think, is one that is really great and really popular right now. And then you can also read erotic novels if that's something. Graphic novels are also really great for individuals looking to spice things up. But yeah, I really think that people just get stuck in this idea that it's porn or nothing, and it's not. You can expand your horizons when it comes to sex scientifically, as well as medically, as well as in entertainment ways as well. You can listen to What's Your Position podcast, which is my podcast, and we talk about things in a very funny way. But also educational. So there's so many ways that people can start incorporating it, just baby steps.
Yeah, very well said. Is there anything about your work, human connection, human sexuality, camming, anything that we haven't talked about that you want to share?
I think that as a society, we can take pages from other countries' books when it comes to comfortability surrounding the human experience. Norway, for example, is one that I go to quite frequently in their ability to incorporate health and sexual wellness in kindergarten through senior year in high school. And I personally would love to be able to write curriculum that spans that age. I think it's extremely important to teach children the correct names for their body parts. There's numerous studies that have shown when children know the medical terms for their body parts and understand consent at a young age, the chances of them being sexually assaulted plummet. And when we are allowing our children to learn things as they come up, and when children ask you questions, having a knowledge base is super important instead of shutting them down and shaming them. We see in utero children touching their genitals. We know that babies touch their genitals to experience pleasure, and it's not out of a sexual need, it's really out of a normal human state. And children as young as 3 years old are rubbing up against furniture and rubbing up against stuffed animals. But that part of the human experience is typically shut down by caregivers. We're told that it's bad, we're told that it's dirty, we're told that it's wrong, instead of explaining why it's happening and explaining where we can do this in a safe, sane, and consensual way. We're not going to rub on the furniture when grandma's in the room. If you'd like to go and do that in your bedroom with the door closed, you're more than welcome to. That's a much more appropriate way to handle the situation than to say, don't touch that, it's dirty. Immediately that child connects their genitalia to filth and shame. And that instills in them that sense for the rest of their life. There are women who cannot have penetrative sex because their vaginal muscles are so tightly closed due to pain and shame that they are not able to experience sexual penetration with their partners and therefore are not living their best lives. They will never reach that self-actualization portion of Maslow's hierarchy of needs because they can't even get past the first fucking level.
For anyone listening that realizes, okay, maybe I've gotten it wrong either with my kids or with myself, or I myself am a victim of bad education.
Mm.
What are just a few practical first steps in feeling good about their sexuality again?
I would say therapy. It's one of my favorite things to recommend to people. And you can find a therapist who is well versed in sex and sexuality. But most therapists have to go through some training when it comes to the human experience and sex. So, talking to a therapist, I would say journaling your feelings. And then, at the very basic level, if you're comfortable, I would say start exploring your body on your own. Masturbation is a wonderful way to get to know yourself, to know what you like, to know what you don't like, to know where your erogenous zones are, understanding how our bodies are made, understanding that every single vulva, every single labia, every single penis, every single testicle is different. None of them look the same. They are all different and they are all beautiful. So, not being ashamed of your genitals, not being ashamed of your pleasure. Masturbating is excellent as well. It's a great sleep aid. It's excellent to help knock you out at the end of the night. It's a great stress reliever. It also releases all those happy chemicals that we love so very much. I would also say getting yourself some books if that's your jam. I love Tell Me What You Want by Justin Lee Miller. I love Come As You Are. And also the book Becoming Clitorate by Lori Mintz. That's a really great book to read about the orgasm gap, understanding that heterosexual men have an orgasm on average 90% of the time when they're having sex, versus women who are having orgasms about 16% of the time when they're having penetrative sex. But women are having orgasms about 95% of the time when they're masturbating. So it's not that women can't have orgasms, it's that we have put this script around penetrative sex and we need to rewrite that script. I would also say that if you are still entrenched in spirituality and experiencing spiritual shame or purity culture, really take a step back and look at the culture that you're in and whether or not it is adding any sort of value to your life, or if there's anything about it that you can maybe rework or configure to make your life better. And then knowing that it should be equal. Pleasure is equal for everyone. There is no one person, no one body, no one size, no one shape, no one gender, no one age that deserves pleasure more than anyone else. Anyone deserves pleasure, whether they are 123 or have one leg or are in a relationship, are married, are divorced. Everyone deserves pleasure. And when we begin to understand and realize that, we can remember that we are everyone. We ourselves are part of that everyone. We deserve pleasure. And when we want to give pleasure to another person, that's a kindness. That's giving something to someone else is such a joy. It brings you so much joy when you're able to make someone else happy. And I have never met a human being who didn't find orgasms happy. So I think giving orgasms to people in a safe, sane, and consensual way is an excellent gift that you can give someone.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much. This has been an
Yeah,
incredible conversation.
thank you. I really appreciated it. It was a great conversation. I loved it.